My parents publicly announced I would be taking over their mortgage to fund my brother's lavish wedding, assuming I would just obey. They didn't know I still held the original deed. I filed it the next morning, terminating their ownership and their free ride forever. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was already running on fumes when I pulled into the driveway of the house I had legally purchased 4 years ago. The house my parents, Arthur and Brenda, called theirs. I had spent the last 72 hours in a high-stakes closing process at the law firm where I worked. As a senior paralegal specializing in property titles and complex trusts, the end of the quarter meant sleepless nights, endless document reviews, and a diet consisting entirely of lukewarm coffee and ibuprofen. My head was pounding with a migraine that felt like a rail spike being driven slowly into my left temple. My eyes were gritty, my body ached, and all I wanted to do was drop off the potato salad I had promised for the family barbecue, say hello, and then go home to sleep for 14 hours. But I couldn't. This was the engagement kickoff for my younger brother, Kyle, and his fiancée, Sophie. Attendance was mandatory. In my family, mandatory meant that if I didn't show up, my mother would call me every hour on the hour, weeping about how I didn't care about the family legacy. I parked my modest sedan between Kyle's leased luxury SUV and my father's brand new truck. The contrast always made my stomach turn slightly. I made good money, very good money, but I saved it. They spent money they didn't have, usually operating under the assumption that things would just work out. I walked into the backyard, the heavy glass bowl of potato salad digging into my hip. The sun was glaring, intensifying my migraine. About 20 people were there, a mix of relatives, neighbors, and Sophie's loud, bubbly friends. "There she is, the working girl," my father, Arthur, boomed from the grill. He was wearing an apron that said the boss, a irony that wasn't lost on me considering who actually paid the property taxes on the land he was standing on. "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice raspy. "Happy to be here, just a bit tired." "You're always tired, Amy," my mother, Brenda, sighed, appearing at my elbow with a glass of cheap wine. She looked me up and down, frowning at my comfortable slacks and blouse. "Sophie is wearing a dress. You could have tried a little harder for your brother." "I came straight from the office, Mom. I haven't slept in 2 days." "Well, grab a burger and wake up," she snapped lightly, patting my arm with a passive-aggressive force. "We have an announcement to make later. Big news." I drifted to the edge of the patio, trying to find a patch of shade. I watched Kyle holding court by the cooler. He was 28, handsome in a conventional, soft way, and completely useless when it came to adult responsibilities. He had bounced between 3 startup ideas in the last 2 years, all funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. And then there was Sophie. She was standing next to him, glittering. Everything about her was shiny, her hair, her jewelry, her teeth. She was laughing at something Kyle said, her hand resting possessively on his chest. She spotted me and offered a tiny, wiggling wave with her fingers, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. An hour later, the clinking of a fork against glass pierced my eardrums. Everyone, gather round," Arthur shouted. He had his arm around Brenda, and they were beaming. Kyle and Sophie stood next to them, looking like the royal couple of suburbia. I leaned against the siding of the house, closing my eyes for a second. "Just get through the toast," I told myself. "Then you can leave." "As you know," Arthur began, his chest puffing out, "Kyle and Sophie are tying the knot next spring. It's going to be the event of the season." Cheers erupted. Sophie did a little curtsy. "But," Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a serious, solemn tone, "weddings are expensive, and these two need a proper start. A house of their own. A nest egg." My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. That was the tone he used before asking to borrow a few $1,000s. "So, Brenda and I have sat down and crunched the numbers," Arthur said. He looked directly at me then. The The smile on his face didn't look like a smile anymore, it looked like a challenge. We realized that we are spending far too much on our overhead here. We want to give Kyle and Sophie the down payment they deserve. So, we've decided to restructure the family finances. He took a breath. The backyard went silent. Starting next month, we are stepping back from the mortgage payments on this house, Arthur announced loudly. Since Amy I.'s doing so well at her big city law firm, and since she's the one who stands to inherit this place eventually anyway, we decided it's time she takes over the full mortgage. That frees up our income to fully fund Kyle and Sophie's wedding and their new home. The air left my lungs. It wasn't a request, it was a decree, publicly, in front of neighbors, family, and strangers. I froze, the plate of food in my hand trembling slightly. I stared at them. They weren't looking at me with gratitude, they were looking at me with expectation. Then Sophie clapped. It was a sharp, loud sound. "Oh, that is wonderful," Sophie squealed, her voice cutting through the humid air. She looked right at me, her expression twisting into a smirk of triumph. "About time she contributed. I mean, honestly, Amy, you've been hoarding your money while Kyle has been trying to build a life. It's only fair." The crowd murmured their agreement. "Good for you, Arthur," someone said. "Family helps family." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold despite the heat. My migraine flared into a blinding white star of pain. They weren't asking me. They were assigning me a debt of $2,000 a month on a house I didn't live in, so they could throw a party for the brother who had never worked a hard day in his life. I looked at Kyle. He just shrugged, grinning, as if to say, "Thanks, sis." I looked at my parents. They were beaming, waiting for me to publicly agree, to play the good daughter, to bow my head and say, "Of course." But the betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a surgical excision of my worth, removing me from the family, except as a financial host. I didn't scream, I didn't flip the table, I didn't even cry. The shock was so absolute it acted like a momentary anesthesia. I stood there, the plastic plate in my hand feeling incredibly heavy, as the applause died down and the chatter resumed. People were patting Arthur on the back, congratulating him on his generosity, completely ignoring the fact that his generosity was entirely funded by my wallet. Sophie walked over to me, her heels clicking on the patio pavers. She held a glass of champagne, the bubbles fizzing near the rim. "So," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that wasn't actually a whisper, "we're thinking a destination wedding. Italy, maybe. Since you're handling the boring house stuff for your parents now, they can really help us with the deposits. It's such a relief, Amy. Really." I looked at her. I saw the calculation in her eyes. She didn't see a sister-in-law, she saw a line of credit. "Italy," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes, or maybe the south of France, we'll see." She took a sip of her drink, leaving a lipstick stain on the rim. "Oh, and don't worry about the mortgage transfer paperwork. Kyle said you do that stuff for a living, so I'm sure you can whip it up for your dad to sign. Just make sure it's done by the 1st, okay? We need their cash flow freed up immediately." She patted my cheek, actually patted it, like I was a dog that had finally learned a trick. "I have to go," I said. "Already," Sophie frowned. "We haven't even cut the cake." "I'm not feeling well." I turned and walked away. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. I didn't acknowledge Kyle, who was busy showing off his watch to a cousin. I walked to my car, my legs feeling like they were moving through deep water. As I sat in the driver's seat, the silence of the car wrapped around me. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't get the key into the ignition for a solid 10 seconds. "About time she contributed." The words echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my skull. Contributed. I paid the property taxes. I paid the insurance. I paid for the new roof last year when Arthur claimed he was short on cash because of an investment that went south. I had bought the groceries for this very barbecue. I drove home in a daze. The drive was 40 minutes, but I don't remember any of it. I remember pulling into my apartment complex, A clean, quiet, modest place that cost half of what my parents' mortgage payment was. I walked inside, kicked off my shoes, and sat on my couch in the dark. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Brenda. "Where did you go? Rudeness is not attractive, Amy. Everyone is asking why you left. Dad expects you to come over tomorrow night to set up the bank transfers. Don't be difficult. This is for your brother." I stared at the screen. Don't be difficult. That was the family motto for me. Amy is the strong one. Amy can handle it. Amy doesn't need help. Amy, fix this. I put the phone face down on the coffee table. The migraine was receding, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was a sensation I knew well from my job. It was the feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a title search, a fatal flaw in a contract that everyone else had missed. They thought they had trapped me. They thought that by announcing it publicly, they had used social pressure to force my hand. They banked on my desire to avoid a scene. They banked on my history of being the doormat. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I stood up and walked to my bedroom closet. I pushed aside the hanging clothes and knelt down to the small, fireproof safe bolted to the floor. I spun the dial, right, left, right. The lock clicked, a sound loud in the silent apartment. I opened the heavy door and reached into the back, pulling out a manila envelope labeled Parents 124 Oak Street. I sat on the floor and opened the clasp. I slid the documents out. Top of the stack, the original purchase agreement from 5 years ago. My name was on the loan. My name was on the title. Beneath that, a life estate agreement I had drafted myself, allowing them to live there as long as they covered the mortgage interest and utilities. And beneath that, the document they had clearly forgotten about, the fail-safe. It was a quitclaim deed, signed by Arthur and Brenda 5 years ago, notarized and fully executed. At the time, I had told them it was standard procedure for liability protection, since I was the one taking on the risk of the loan while they had bad credit. They had signed it without reading it, too busy celebrating that I had saved them from foreclosure on their previous home. The deed transferred all rights, title, and interest in the property at 124 Oak Street from them to me. It was undated. In the eyes of the law, an undated, signed, and notarized deed is a loaded gun. All it needs is a date and a stamp from the county clerk to be fired. They wanted me to handle the mortgage. They wanted me to contribute. I looked at the signature on the bottom line, Arthur Miller, Brenda Miller. I reached for a pen from my nightstand. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "I'll handle it." To understand why I held that deed, and why I hadn't filed it yet, you have to understand the history of the house on Oak Street. 5 years ago, Arthur and Brenda had managed to gamble away their retirement savings on a guaranteed multi-level marketing scheme involving essential oils. They lost their previous home. They were facing bankruptcy. Kyle, naturally, was in college, a degree he never finished, and was completely insulated from the crisis. I was 27, just starting to make real traction in my career. I liquidated my 401k. I drained my savings. I used my pristine credit score to buy the house on Oak Street because no bank would touch my parents. "We will pay the mortgage, Amy," my father had promised, tears in his eyes. "We just need a roof. You're saving our lives. This is your house. We're just caretakers." I believed them. I drafted the life estate agreement to give them dignity so they could say they owned it to their friends. I let them play house. I let them pretend. Over the years, the narrative shifted. It went from Amy's house that we live in to our house that Amy helped with to, eventually, just our house. I stayed silent. I let them have their pride. I paid the taxes quietly. I fixed the furnace when it died. I drove Kyle to his interviews. I edited his resumes. I was the safety net that they didn't even see anymore because they had been walking on it for so long. And then came Sophie. Sophie entered the picture 18 months ago. She met Kyle at a club. She was a lifestyle consultant, which, as far as I could tell, meant she posted photos of brunch on Instagram and tried to get brands to send her free leggings. From the moment she met my parents, she had them wrapped around her manicured finger. She was the daughter they wanted, glamorous, loud, needy. She flattered Arthur's ego, calling him a business genius. She went shopping with Brenda, putting hundreds of dollars of clothes on credit cards I later found out were under my name as an authorized user, cards I had since confiscated. Sophie saw me as a threat immediately. I was the one who asked questions. I was the one who said no. I remember the first time the mask slipped. It was Christmas, 6 months ago. We were in the kitchen. "You know, Amy," Sophie had said, leaning against the counter while I did the dishes. "It's weird that you're single. Usually women with your career focus are trying to compensate for something." "I'm not compensating, Sophie. I'm building a future." She laughed, a tinkling, condescending sound. "A future alone? What's the point of money if you don't have anyone to spend it on? Kyle says you're just cheap, that you sit on a pile of cash like a dragon." "Kyle says that." "We all say it," she smiled sweetly. "But don't worry. Once Kyle and I are married, we're going to change the energy of this family. We're going to really live." I didn't realize then that living meant cannibalizing my finances. The antagonist wasn't just my parents' entitlement, it was Sophie. She was the catalyst. She was the one whispering in their ears that they deserved more, that I was holding out on them, that the house was an asset they could squeeze. She had clearly done the math. She knew that if I paid the mortgage, that freed up exactly $2,100 a month for my parents. Over a year, that was $25,000, enough for a venue deposit, enough for a custom dress, enough for a honeymoon in Positano. She had engineered this barbecue ambush. I could see it now. The timing, the public announcement, the clapping. It was a strategic strike designed to shame me into compliance. I looked at the deed on my lap. They thought I was a paralegal. They thought I pushed papers. They didn't realize that my entire job consisted of reading the fine print that destroys people who think they are smarter than the law. I picked up my phone and opened my calendar. Tomorrow was Monday. I had a 9:00 a.m. meeting with a client, but the county clerk's office opened at 8:00 a.m. I would be the first person in line. The county clerk's office smelled of stale coffee and old paper, a scent that, to me, smelled like absolute power. I was standing at the intake window at 8:02 a.m. The clerk, a woman named Beverly who I had worked with on dozens of closings over the years, looked at me over her reading glasses. She held the quitclaim deed in her hand, inspecting the notary seal. "Morning, Amy," she said, her voice raspy. "Personal business today." "You could say that," I replied, my hands folded on the counter to hide the slight tremor in my fingers. It wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of crossing a bridge and then immediately torching it. "Everything looks in order. Arthur and Brenda Miller to Amy Miller. Consideration of $10. Signatures are good." She picked up the heavy, self-inking stamp. Thud. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. "Recorded," Beverly said, sliding the document across the counter toward the scanner. "It's official. You want a certified copy." "I'll take 3, I said. By 9:00 a.m., I was at my desk at the firm. The migraine was gone, replaced by a hyper-focused clarity. I logged into my computer and opened a new file, labeling it Personal Eviction 124 Oak. But before I drafted the notice to quit, I needed to know the full extent of the battlefield. If they were bold enough to demand I pay their mortgage in front of an audience, what else were they feeling entitled to? I logged into the credit monitoring service I used for my own accounts. I had authorized user cards for my parents, strictly for emergencies, a setup established years ago when their credit was in the single digits. I usually just paid the minimums and ignored the statements, absorbing the cost as the rent for being their daughter. I clicked on the transaction history for the card ending in 4098. My breath hitched. The bridal barn, $4,200. Prestige limousine service, deposit, $800. Luxury linens and things, $1,500. The dates were all from last week, the week leading up to the barbecue. While I was pulling all-nighters closing corporate mergers, Sophie and my mother had been on a shopping spree, funding the engagement on a card that was legally mine. I felt a cold burn in my chest. They weren't just asking me to take over the mortgage. They had already started siphoning my credit limit to pay for the wedding accessories. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. Under the Inquiries tab, there was a hard pull from SunTrust Lending dated this morning. 8:15 a.m. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the bank's lending department. I navigated the automated system with the practiced speed of someone who did this 10 times a day. Loan department, this is Mark. Hi Mark, this is Amy Miller. I'm seeing a hard inquiry on my property address, 124 Oak Street, and I didn't authorize it. There was the clicking of a keyboard. One moment. Yes, we have an application here for a home equity line of credit, $50,000. Applicant is Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller doesn't own the property, I said, my voice ice cold. Well, looking at the file here, he listed himself as owner-occupant. We were just about to order the appraisal. Cancel it, I said. As of 8:02 a.m. this morning, a new deed was recorded transferring full ownership to me. Any application by Arthur Miller is fraudulent. And Mark, if you proceed with this loan, I will sue the bank for negligence before the ink is dry. Whoa, okay, Ms. Miller. I see the title flag popping up now in the system. I'm canceling the application immediately. Do you want to report this as fraud? Not yet, I said. I'll handle the applicant myself. I hung up. I sat back in my chair, staring at the cityscape outside my window. Arthur had tried to take out a $50,000 loan against the equity I had built in the house, probably to pay for the venue deposit Sophie was bragging about. If I hadn't filed that deed this morning, I had slept in or hesitated, he might have pushed it through before the title search caught up. He was going to strip the house of its value and leave me with the debt. The betrayal was total. It wasn't just financial abuse, it was financial predation. I opened my drafting software. I didn't type a letter, I typed a legal notice. Notice to quit and termination of tenancy, AT will. I typed in the names: Arthur Miller, Brenda Miller, Kyle Miller, Sophie Jenkins. I printed it on the firm's heavy bond paper. It looked official. It looked lethal. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Kyle. Hey sis, Mom says don't forget to come over at 6 for dinner. Bring the checkbook, lol. Sophie made lasagna. I looked at the text. Lasagna. The price of my servitude was pasta and cheese. I replied, I'll be there. The driveway at 124 Oak Street was full. Kyle's SUV, Sophie's convertible, my parents' cars. The house was blazing with light. From the sidewalk, it looked like a happy home. I walked up the path, clutching a leather portfolio. I wasn't carrying potato salad this time. I opened the front door without knocking. I still had my key, after all. Amy, in the dining room, my mother called out. I walked in. The table was set with the good china. There was wine breathing in a decanter. Sophie was sitting at the head of the table, my father's usual spot, looking like she was holding court. Kyle was pouring wine. Arthur and Brenda were seated on the sides, looking eager. You're late, Sophie said, checking her watch. We were about to start without you. I had errands, I said, remaining standing. Well, sit, Arthur said, gesturing to the empty chair at the far end of the table. The kids' table spot. We have the laptop set up so you can show us how the transfer works. Sophie found a venue in Tuscany that requires a deposit by Friday, so we need that mortgage off our books ASAP. I placed the leather portfolio on the table. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the wood made everyone pause. There won't be a transfer, I said calmly. Sophie rolled her eyes. Oh my God, are we doing this? Amy, don't be dramatic. We all agreed at the barbecue. You announced it at the barbecue, I corrected. I never agreed. It's not up for debate, Amy, my mother snapped, her face flushing. We are your parents. We need this help to give your brother a good start. You can afford it. Stop being selfish. I'm not being selfish, Mom. I'm being the owner. I opened the portfolio. I took out the 3 certified copies of the quitclaim deed and slid one to Arthur, one to Brenda, and one to Sophie. What is this? Arthur squinted, picking up the paper. That, I said, is the quitclaim deed you signed 5 years ago. I filed it this morning. As of 8:02 a.m. today, I am the sole legal owner of this property. There is no mortgage for you to hand over because you don't own the house anymore. I do. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Arthur's face turned a violent shade of purple. You filed this. This was for insurance. You said this was just in case we died. I said it was for liability protection, I said smoothly. And right now, you are a liability. I found out about the HELOC application, Dad. You tried to borrow $50,000 against my house this morning. Sophie stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. HELOC? What are you talking about? Arthur said he had the cash for the deposit. He doesn't have cash, Sophie, I said, turning my gaze to her. He has credit card debt and a daughter he treats like an ATM, but the ATM is out of order. You stole our house, Brenda shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. Arthur, do something, she stole it. I didn't steal anything, I said, my voice raising just enough to cut through her hysteria. I bought it. I paid the down payment. I paid the taxes. And now I've secured the title. I reached into the portfolio again and pulled out the stack of notices to quit. Since you are no longer owners, you are tenants, I explained, sliding the papers across the table. Tenants at will, and as your landlord, I am terminating your tenancy. Kyle laughed. It was a nervous, disbelief-filled sound. Amy, come on, you're kicking Mom and Dad out, you're joking. I'm giving you 30 days, I said. That's more than the law requires for a non-paying tenant. You have until the 5th of next month to vacate the premises. If you aren't out, I will file for formal eviction on the 6th. That goes on your public record, which will make renting an apartment very difficult. Arthur stood up, shaking the deed in his hand. You ungrateful little witch. After everything we did for you, we raised you, we fed you. And I bought you a house, I shouted back, finally letting the anger crack through the professional veneer. I saved you from bankruptcy, and how did you repay me? You tried to saddle me with your debt so you could throw a party for him. I pointed at Kyle. This is illegal, Sophie screamed. You can't do this, we have rights, we're family. You're not family, Sophie, I said coldly. You're a guest, and your invitation has been revoked. I turned to leave. If you walk out that door, my father threatened, his voice shaking with rage, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? Dead. I paused at the doorway. I looked back at them, Arthur purple with rage, Brenda weeping theatrically into her napkin, Kyle looking terrified, and Sophie staring at the eviction notice like it was a bomb. I've been dead to you for years, I said. I was just a ghost who paid the bills. Now I'm the landlord. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, hearing the latch click. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I expected them to pack. I expected them to realize they were beaten. I underestimated their capacity for delusion. The next morning, my phone was blowing up. Not from them. I had blocked their numbers the night before, but from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Amy, how could you do this to your parents? Kicking them out on the street? Have you no soul? Your mother is sick with worry. Fix this. Sophie had gone to work. I pulled up Facebook on my lunch break. There was a video posted on her timeline, captioned, "When family turns out to be toxic snakes. Snake-broken homeless for the wedding evil sister-in-law." In the video, Sophie was crying actual tears, which I had to admit was impressive acting. talking about how her fiancé's jealous sister had used a legal loophole to steal her in-law's retirement home just because she was bitter about not being married. She didn't mention the mortgage, the HELOC, or the fact that I bought the house. She spun a tale of a spinster seeking revenge on true love. The comments were vicious. People were threatening to find out where I worked. I took screenshots of everything. Defamation, I noted mentally, harassment. But the real escalation came at 2:00 p.m. My office line rang. It was the receptionist. "Amy, there's a man on line 1. He says he's your father's attorney." I raised an eyebrow. My father couldn't afford an attorney. "This is Amy Miller." "Ms. Miller, this is Gregory Hinz. I represent Arthur and Brenda Miller. I'm calling regarding the fraudulent deed transfer you executed yesterday." "It wasn't fraudulent, Mr. Hinz. It was a perfected quitclaim pursuant to a valid agreement. My clients claim they signed that document under duress 5 years ago and that it was never intended to be recorded. We are preparing to file a lease pendens on the property and a civil suit to quiet title. We will also be seeking an emergency injunction to halt the eviction." He was bluffing. I knew the law. Duress had a statute of limitations, and they had lived there rent-free for 5 years, which constituted acceptance of the arrangement. But a lawsuit would tie up the property for months, costing me thousands in legal fees. It was a scorched-earth tactic. "Tell me, Mr. Hinz," I said, leaning back. "Did Arthur mention the HELOC application he falsified yesterday morning? The one where he claimed to be the owner after title had passed, because that's bank fraud, federal bank fraud." There was a long silence on the other end. "I was not aware of a loan application. I have the time-stamped record from the bank. If you file a suit, I will countersue for fraud, and I will refer the loan application to the district attorney. Arthur won't just lose the house, he'll go to prison." Another silence. "I see, I will confer with my client." He hung up. I knew I had stopped the legal assault, but I needed to end this completely. I needed to cut off the supply lines. I called the credit card company for the emergency card. "I need to report unauthorized charges," I told the fraud specialist. "The card ending in 4098, the charges at the Bridal Barn, Prestige Limo, and Luxury Linens, those were not made by me." "Okay, we can open an investigation. We will freeze the card and issue a chargeback to the vendors while we verify." "Please do," I said. The beauty of a chargeback is that it hits the merchant immediately. The money is pulled from their account. 2 hours later, my email pinged. It was a notification from the Bridal Barn. Since my email was attached to the card, I got the automated alert. "Payment reversed, insufficient funds dispute." I smiled, but I wasn't done. I went to the power company website. The electric bill was in my name. I had paid it for 5 years. I clicked Schedule Service Disconnection. Date, 30 days from today. I wasn't going to turn the lights out on them illegally. I would follow the eviction timeline to the letter, but I wanted them to get the notification. I wanted the letter to arrive in the mail saying, "Service at this address is scheduled to be terminated." Then the final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Amy Miller?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded stressed. "Yes." "Hi, this is Sarah from Vows and Views, the wedding venue in Tuscany. We're trying to process the second half of the deposit for the Miller-Jenkins wedding, but the card on file was declined. Sophie gave us your number as the backup contact and said you were handling the finances." My grip on the phone tightened. "Sophie gave you my number?" "Yes, she listed you as the guarantor on the contract. She said you're the—" "Sorry, let me read the note. The family banker." I closed my eyes. They had forged my signature. Or at least, misrepresented my consent to a binding international contract. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am not the guarantor. I did not sign that contract. If Sophie forged my signature, that is a crime. Cancel the reservation immediately. If you run my card, I will report it as theft." "Oh my God," Sarah gasped. I'm so sorry. I'll cancel it right now. We have a strict policy against third-party payments without written authorization anyway." "Good, and Sarah, you might want to let Sophie know that her family banker has closed the branch." I hung up. The trap was set, the credit cards were dead, the venue was canceled, the loan was blocked, the eviction was filed. They had tried to bleed me dry. Now, they were going to find out just how cold it gets when the flow stops. I knew the ambush was coming. The silence from my parents had been too loud, the lack of screaming voicemails too suspicious. 3 days after the venue cancellation, I received a text from my Aunt Clara. Clara was the matriarch of the extended family, a woman who wielded guilt like a samurai sword. "Amy, Sunday dinner. My house. 5:00 p.m. No excuses. We need to resolve this misunderstanding before it tears the family apart." It wasn't an invitation, it was a subpoena. I arrived at Aunt Clara's Victorian house at 5:05 p.m. I wanted them to be seated before I walked in. I wanted the audience to be assembled. I carried my heavy leather portfolio, the same one I had used to deliver the eviction notices, but this time it was thicker. It contained the discovery phase of my personal investigation: the bank fraud affidavit, the credit card chargeback notices, the email from the Tuscan venue confirming the forged signature, and a printout of Sophie's social media smear campaign. I walked into the living room. It was crowded. My parents were there, looking haggard and tragic on the floral sofa. Sophie was perched on the armrest next to Kyle, clutching a tissue, her eyes red-rimmed but suspiciously devoid of actual swelling. Aunt Clara sat in her high-backed armchair, flanked by Uncle Bob and 2 of my cousins. The atmosphere was stiflingly hot, smelling of potpourri and judgment. "She's here," Sophie sniffed, burying her face in Kyle's shoulder. Kyle glared at me, but there was fear behind his eyes. He looked like a man who was slowly realizing he was standing on a trapdoor. "Sit down, Amy," Aunt Clara commanded, pointing to a hard wooden chair in the center of the room, the accused's chair. "I'll stand, thanks," I said, clutching the portfolio against my chest. "Amy," Uncle Bob started, his voice a low rumble. "Your father has told us everything. He told us how you tricked them into signing over their house, how you're throwing them out on the street because you're jealous of your brother's happiness. It's shameful." "Tricked them," I repeated, looking at Arthur. He refused to meet my eyes. "Is that what you said, Dad, that I tricked you?" "You manipulated us," Arthur burst out, finding his courage in the crowd. "You knew we didn't read those papers. You stole our equity." "And now," Sophie wailed, "we have to cancel the wedding because Amy froze the accounts. She called the venue and lied to them. She's trying to ruin everything because she's bitter and alone." Aunt Clara stood up, her face tight with disapproval. "Amy, this ends now. You will sign that deed back over to your parents. You will reinstate the credit cards. And you will apologize to Sophie. We are a family, and we do not destroy each other." I looked around the room. I saw the nodding heads of my cousins. I saw the smug triumph on Sophie's face. She thought she had won. She thought the pressure of the tribe would break me. I walked over to the coffee table, pushing aside a tray of stale cookies. "I agree," I said quietly. "We shouldn't destroy each other, which is why you all need to see this." I opened the portfolio. "Exhibit A," I announced, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room. I laid down the bank fraud report. "This is a loan application submitted by Arthur Miller to SunTrust Bank at 8:15 a.m. on Monday morning. In this application, he claimed to be the sole owner of 124 Oak Street. He attempted to borrow $50,000 against the house." "So," Uncle Bob scoffed, "it's his house." "No, Bob," I said, turning to him. "It hasn't been his house for 5 years. I bought it when they went bankrupt. I have paid every tax bill, every insurance premium, and every repair bill. But here is the kicker. Arthur submitted this application after I had already recorded the deed transferring the title. That is federal bank fraud. It is a felony punishable by up to 30 years in prison. The room went quiet. Arthur paled. Exhibit B, I continued, laying down the credit card statements. The family emergency card, the one I pay for. Sophie and Brenda charged $6,000 in 1 week, not for emergencies, for a wedding dress, for limousines. We were going to pay you back, Brenda shouted. With what money? I asked. The money from the loan you were going to take out on my house. I didn't wait for an answer. I pulled out the email from Sarah at Vows and Views. And finally, Exhibit C, the wedding venue in Tuscany. I looked directly at Sophie. Sophie listed me as the financial guarantor. She forged my digital signature on the contract. That is identity theft. That is international wire fraud. Sophie stood up, her hands trembling. I didn't forge it. You said you would help. I never said I would pay for a castle in Italy, Sophie, I snapped. I recorded our conversation at the barbecue. Would you like me to play it? It was a bluff. I hadn't recorded it, but Sophie didn't know that. She froze. I turned back to Aunt Clara. You want me to sign the house back. If I do that, the bank will seize it within a month because Dad has no income to pay the mortgage. You want me to apologize? I'm the only reason they aren't in a homeless shelter right now. I looked at Kyle. He was staring at the documents on the table. He picked up the email about the forged signature. He read it, his lips moving slightly. You signed Amy's name, Kyle whispered, looking up at Sophie. I had to, Sophie shrieked, her mask finally slipping completely. Your parents are broke, Kyle. They have nothing. They promised me a wedding. They promised me a house. And she pointed a shaking finger at me. She's hoarding it all. She has a good job. She has savings. She doesn't need the money. It's not fair. It's not yours, I said coldly. It should be ours, Sophie screamed, her face twisting into something ugly and unrecognizable. You're a loser, Kyle. You told me your family had money. You told me your sister would cover us. If she cuts us off, what do you have? Nothing. You're a broke, unemployed loser living in your parents' basement. The silence that followed was absolute. Kyle looked like he had been slapped. He looked at Sophie, the woman he defended, the woman he idolized, and saw her for the first time. He saw the greed. He saw the contempt. Sophie, Kyle said, his voice cracking, we're getting married. Not anymore, Sophie spat. She grabbed her purse. I'm not marrying into a destitute family. I'm not living in an apartment. I'm done. She stormed out of the house. The front door slammed, shaking the picture frames on the walls. Arthur and Brenda sat on the sofa, looking small and defeated. The golden child narrative had shattered. Their rich lifestyle had been exposed as a sham funded by their daughter. Aunt Clara looked at the documents on the table, then at Arthur. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and looked at me. Amy, she said, her voice lacking its usual imperious edge, would you like some tea? No thank you, Aunt Clara, I said, closing my portfolio. I have a move-out inspection to schedule. The 30 days passed in a blur of logistics and silence. Arthur and Brenda didn't fight the eviction. The threat of the fraud charges hanging over Arthur's head was enough to ensure their compliance. They found a small, 2-bedroom rental in a neighboring town, a significant downgrade from the 4-bedroom colonial on Oak Street, but something they could actually afford on their Social Security checks. The day they moved out, I stood on the sidewalk and watched. There were no movers, just Arthur, Brenda, and a very quiet Kyle loading boxes into a U-Haul. When they were done, Arthur walked up to me to hand over the keys. He looked older. The bravado was gone. You happy now? He asked, his voice rough. You won. It wasn't a competition, Dad, I said, taking the keys. It was a boundary. I didn't want to win, I just wanted to stop losing. He didn't know what to say to that. He just shook his head, got in the truck, and drove away. He didn't say goodbye. I walked into the house. It was empty. The walls were scuffed where they had dragged furniture. The carpet was stained. It smelled of stale memories. But for the first time in 5 years, the air felt light. It felt like mine. I spent the next week cleaning. I painted the walls a crisp, clean white. I ripped up the old carpet and refinished the hardwood floors underneath. I was preparing to sell it. I didn't want to live there. I didn't want the ghosts. I wanted the equity to buy a place that had no history, no baggage. One afternoon, while I was sanding the banister, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my overalls and opened the door. It was Kyle. He looked different. He wasn't wearing his usual entrepreneur uniform of designer leisure wear. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt stained with paint. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. "Hey," he said, standing on the porch. "Hey," I said, guarding the doorway. "I saw the dumpster outside. Figured you were fixing it up." "I am." He shifted his weight. "I'm staying at a friend's place. Got a job, actually. Warehouse work. It's hard, but it pays." I nodded. "That's good, Kyle. Honest work is good." "Look, Amy," he started, looking down at his boots. "I wanted to come here and, I don't know, the way Sophie spoke to me at Aunt Clara's, the things she said." "She showed you who she was, Kyle." "Yeah, but she also showed me who I was," he said, looking up at me. "I was a leech, Amy. I let Mom and Dad bail me out. I let you bail me out. I sat there and clapped when they said you'd pay the mortgage. I clapped because I thought I was owed it, because I was the special one." He laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "I'm not special. I'm almost 30 and I have nothing to show for it but a canceled wedding and a mountain of debt." I softened just a fraction. "You're young, Kyle, you can rebuild, but you have to do it yourself." "I know," he said. I wanted to say I'm sorry, for everything, for the house, for not defending you. You were the only one holding the roof up and we tried to knock the pillars down." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. "It's not much," he said, handing it to me. "First paycheck, it's $200. I know I owe you thousands for the credit card stuff Sophie bought, but it's a start." I took the envelope. It felt heavier than the check inside. It represented the first time my brother had ever taken responsibility for his own existence. "Thank you, Kyle," I said genuinely. "It's a start." "Are you going to sell the place?" he asked, looking past me into the empty hallway. "Yeah, I think it's time for a clean slate, for all of us." He nodded. "Well, good luck with the sale. You deserve it, Amy, you really do." He turned and walked down the path. He walked with a little more weight on his shoulders, but he walked straighter. I went back inside and closed the door. I walked to the center of the empty living room. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. The refund from the wedding venue had cleared. The credit card disputes were resolved in my favor. The house was fully in my name, unencumbered by their debt or their expectations. I sat down on the floor, in the middle of the sunbeam. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had lost my parents, though in truth, I had lost them a long time ago. I had lost the illusion of a happy family. But I had found my voice. I had found my spine. And most importantly, I had found my freedom. I opened my eyes and smiled. The silence in the house wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful.